In a small village in Spain during the 19th century, a legend began about a woman named Isabella who was accused of witchcraft. She was dragged from her home, tried in secret, and executed without evidence. Before her death, she cursed the villagers, swearing that her spirit would never rest. Decades later, in the early 2000s, a young couple, Maria and Javier, moved into an old stone house on the outskirts of the village, unaware of its history. The home had been abandoned for years, but the price was too good to pass up. They settled in, making it their own, until strange occurrences began. Maria was the first to notice. When she cleaned the antique mirror in the hallway, she swore she saw movement that didn't belong to her reflection. Thinking it was a trick of the light, she brushed it off. But the next night, as she passed the mirror on her way to bed, she heard it. Faint, muffled sobbing. "Javier," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Listen." They both stood in front of the mirror, but the sobbing had stopped. Javier laughed it off, calling her imagination vivid. Maria didn't argue, though her unease lingered. A week later, Maria began to feel as though she wasn't alone. Shadows would flicker at the edges of her vision, and objects, small things like keys and cups, would vanish only to reappear in strange places. One night, while brushing her hair before bed, the mirror in front of her clouded over as though someone had breathed on it. Then, a single word appeared, written as if by an invisible finger. "Why?" Maria screamed, bringing Javier running. He wiped the mirror clean, saying it must have been condensation or a prank, though his voice wavered. That night, neither of them slept. The breaking point came 3 nights later. Around 3 a.m., Maria awoke to the sound of crying. This time it was unmistakable and loud. It echoed through the hallway. Grabbing a flashlight, she and Javier crept toward the source, the antique mirror. In its glassy surface, they saw her. A pale woman with hollow eyes and tears streaming down her cheeks stood inside the mirror, staring back at them. Her lips moved, but her voice was distant, echoing as though from a deep well. "Why did you let them take me?" Javier yanked Maria away, and they both fled the house that very night. The next morning, they returned with a priest who blessed the home and covered the mirror with a sheet. Maria insisted they sell the house, but no buyers came forward. The couple moved away, leaving the house and its eerie history behind. Years later, the house was demolished, but the mirror was salvaged by a collector. It is said to still cry at night, especially during storms, and those who look too long into its surface claim to see the woman, her mournful eyes asking the same question. "Why did you let them take me?" The antique mirror, rescued from the demolished house, found its way into the possession of an eccentric collector named Victor. He specialized in rare and mysterious artifacts, taking pride in the strange and unexplainable stories attached to each piece. When he heard about the crying mirror, he saw it as the centerpiece of his collection. Victor brought the mirror to his workshop, eager to examine it. He noticed the craftsmanship was impeccable, an ornate frame carved with intricate floral patterns and symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Despite its age, the glass was flawless, as though time dared not tarnish it. He dismissed the warnings from locals who had heard about the mirror's haunted past. "Superstitions," he scoffed. But as he worked late into the night cataloging his new treasure, he began to hear faint sobbing. At first, he thought it was the wind, but as the sound grew louder, it became unmistakable. He turned toward the mirror and saw a fog slowly spreading across the glass. His heart raced as words appeared, written in the same invisible hand as before. "You can't hide her." Victor's breath hitched. "Who?" he whispered aloud, his voice trembling. As if in response, the reflection in the mirror shifted. It no longer showed his dimly lit workshop, but a darkened forest. In the distance stood a figure, the crying woman. She began walking toward him, her movements unnaturally jerky, as though she were being pulled by invisible strings. Her face, pale and sunken, grew clearer with each step. Victor tried to look away, but his gaze was locked on the mirror, paralyzed by her hollow, accusing eyes. The workshop lights flickered. The sobbing turned to a low, guttural wail that seemed to echo from inside his head. Suddenly, the woman reached the glass, pressing her hands against it as if trying to break through. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and Victor stumbled back, knocking over a table. When he looked up, the mirror was intact. The sobbing had stopped, but etched permanently into the glass was a single word: guilty. Victor couldn't bring himself to touch the mirror again. He locked it in the basement of his home, but its presence haunted him. Night after night, the sobbing returned, growing louder and more desperate. He began to see the woman in every reflective surface, in the windows and puddles, even in his own shadow. One night, unable to take it any longer, Victor smashed the mirror to pieces, thinking it would end the nightmare. But as the shards scattered across the floor, each one reflected the crying woman. Her voice filled the room, a deafening scream that shook the walls. The next morning, Victor was found in his workshop, lifeless, his face frozen in terror. Around him, the shards of the mirror were gone, replaced by a thick, blackened stain on the floor. The mirror's location remains unknown, but rumors persist of its cursed legacy. Some say pieces of the glass still exist, hidden in forgotten places, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to gaze into its depths.